afternoon. We'll begin the webinar in just 1 second. All right. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this month's webinar on demand trends. I'm Zach Paz. I'm a partner with Gray. It's my pleasure to share the results of the February 2020 with you today. Along the way, if you have questions, please use the chat tool. As questions come up, I will try to answer them, but I will absolutely get to them at the end of the presentation. For many of the people who have joined today are new to Gray, so let me just take a second and introduce Gray and the data we use and the services we provide. Gray is a consulting firm. We have been focused in higher education, helping our clients in the higher education institutions evaluate programs. What new programs should you be offering? What should you be doing about your current program portfolio? And really helping make data-informed decisions, as well as where to locate, not only where you should locate on your campus, potentially, and later in the presentation, we'll show one example of how location may be a big factor, but also marketing, understanding where could you get the largest return on your investment in marketing dollars. Some other items we've helped out on are price, understanding and optimizing your value proposition, understanding what you should price your programs out, who you're competing with, and really, again, as I mentioned, optimizing your value proposition for students. And then finally, we help out with a number of consulting projects, all with leveraging one of our main databases, which includes over a dozen different data sources, all the way down to geographic specific, and we'll be walking through some of that data today. In terms of program evaluation, which is one of the main tools, one of the main things we use our tool for is the student is evaluating not only the markets, but as well as the mission of the institution, the academic standards, and the ability for a program to make money. In this case, we're going to be walking through the markets for programs, where we look at 4 different categories: student demand, employment, competition, and degree fit. So let's jump right in. In terms of the inquiry database, this is one of our main databases where we track over 78 million records. We've been tracking inquiries going back to January 2012. In this webinar, we'll be sharing the results for the last 3 years, but really focusing on the February results. So in February, there was actually an increase in inquiries. We have a 2% overall increase in our database. And so that's good to see, because in November and December, we were seeing declines. And so in January and February, we're now seeing both two consecutive months of increases in our database. Right. In addition to inquiries, we also track conversions. And in this case, a conversion is any inquiry that makes it to the next step. So that would be an application or even further than that. Typically what we find is that it takes about 3 months or more for a conversion to mature. In this case, what we're doing is we're comparing the conversions that happen when the inquiry came in, and then we're counting the conversion in that same month. So when we're looking at November, which is typically what we see as a mature month really becoming mature, there's actually been a decline of 23% in conversions. But this will most likely increase as we've been seeing this, the time for an inquiry to mature actually increase. And for example, in September, one of the largest increases over the last 3 years grew 11%. So we're expecting to see October and November and December still produce more conversions, and therefore you'll see a higher rate there. Within our database, we also track how much, or the average price is paid for those inquiries. This is based on the affiliate lead channel mostly, and it's paid inquiries. With that, over the last 2 months, and especially in February, we've seen a slight increase in the average cost for an inquiry. And that's happened over the last 2 months, whereas last year, it was fluctuating between year-over-year growth and declines. So in the most recent January and February of 2020, we've seen increases in the average cost for those inquiries. So that's great to understand what's going on overall. How does this look when we're comparing, interest in online programs and versus interest in on campus? So let's take a look at online. Overall, online has been increasing. Other than November and December, we've seen consistent increases in the number of online inquiries. In February, we saw a 10% increase. So there's going to be more interest year over year in online programs. It'll be especially interesting to see how the recent events will have an effect on the interest in online programs. So make sure to come back for next month or the next couple of months to see how this everything that's going on will affect this the interest in online. On the other end, we have on campus, and these have been declining consistently, which one indicator of one thing you'll want to be aware of is think about the interest is really moving towards online. So as an institution, are you moving in that direction as well? And so when you see January and February both declining, February at 12%, that might be something to cause you to start making changes if you're not already making them. So how does this, what does this look like by program, degree, and city? So let's start with the big five. These are 5 of the largest programs in our database, and we're just comparing the year-over-year trends in February. The largest growth happened with criminal justice, police science, and it was 42% growth. Business administration also grew 25%. Interestingly enough, we have 3 healthcare programs here, one growing medical and clinical assisting, which, for a long time that was in decline with a lot of the, changes within the institutions, offering that program. And so it's good to see that's bouncing back with growth, growth year over year. Registered nurse and medical office assistant is pretty interesting to see as a decline. These are both still very large programs, so to even just see them, flat for registered nursing to a slight decline for medical assisting isn't too worrisome, especially since we saw such large growth in those programs over the last couple of years. Now, taking into account the fastest growing programs, with at least 1,000 inquiries in our database, IT is the fastest growing year over year with 161%. And that's the only information, that's the only computer program or IT related program that we see on here, which is nice. There's a pretty good mix of fast growing programs from all different disciplines as well as levels. So hospitality management, entrepreneurship, public health, which will be interesting as we, again, make it through the next few months, how the current events will affect, if they will affect, the trends that we're seeing in our demand for programs. One other database that we've been building is a Google search trends. And so what we've been doing is tracking over 200 programs, and we're continuing to develop that list. But for those 200 programs, and they're some of the largest programs based on the number of graduates are produced each year, we're tracking about 20 keywords for each of those. And so they're specific to the program. For example, MBA would be an example for a business administration, or, business administration degree are just a couple of examples. And we'll actually take a look at more examples for our program of our month in a few slides. Overall, Google searches are up for our programs 14%. So that's good to see that, for the academic programs, we're seeing growth in the number of searches year over year. Which programs in our system are declining? And we'll take a look at the growth in a second, but let me just take a second to explain this chart. The red bars on the left side, we see the year-over-year change in Google searches. And so that will give you some interesting programs on here, a lot of healthcare programs that, including healthcare administration, pharmacy technician, two very different levels there. Occupational therapy assistants, pretty interesting to see those in declines. And so it's interesting. We also see two very large programs, chemistry and physics, also in decline. And so it'll be interesting to see how those will shift over time. But in February, these are the largest or the fastest declining programs in our database. Which programs were growing? A couple is just starting at the list. We have a couple of trades programs, HVAC, electrician. Electrician is one of the largest in terms of the searches. And so to see such a large program still growing at a high percentage year over year suggests that that's a really strong, large program. The fastest growing is finance. Also has a large number of searches if we look at the blue bar, and then the green bar is that year-over-year trend. So something's going on in finance where the interest is driving up, is being driven up. It'll be interesting to see how that changes, especially with everything that's going on with the stock market. January and February were great news, and that could be, that could be one reason why searches are up. It'll be interesting to see how that will change as, we see the other side of that where, not as great news in the stock market. So we'll see, again, it'll be interesting to see how these major events that are going on right now will actually shift the interest or not. We also track 350 brands. And so overall, across all of our brands, we're looking that we are tracking. We saw 11% increase. So again, similar to programs, we're also getting an increase in the brand searches as well. So overall, interest in programs, academic institutions are up year over year. If we look at the fastest growing brands, we have Louisiana State University is still at the top of the list. I think they are still riding their win in the National College Championship, football championship. And you can see their year-over-year growth is 413% in February. So, it's still one thing to consider that the brand, the brand searches may be driven not only by program interest, but also in other cases, like in this case, we think the sports were a big reason for their search trends. So let's get into the program of the month. What we're going to be walking through is the student demand, employment, competitive intensity, and degree fit for one program. We'll be focusing on epidemiology in New York State. And so we'll walk through each of these categories and discuss what we're seeing, how we evaluate a program, what it says, and really to help you make a decision. This could be potentially a new program for you. Or if you're evaluating, if you already have this program, are you realizing the potential? And so let's take a look. Starting with student demand, This is first thing to notice, this is a niche program in that it's not going to be a very large program. It's in New York is 176 completions, which isn't small. It's actually compared to all master's level graduate completions. It's in the 93rd percentile. So it's a small program, but looking at it on master's level, it's actually pretty large. And again, what we'll be doing is we'll be walking through some custom Google search polls that we pulled from our database that aren't here, which is a really important thing to know, to understand. What we've done in our systems is tried to pull as much information together all in one place so you can do a comparison of a lot of programs at the same time. There's going to be times where you get to niche programs or smaller programs where you really need to leverage and customize those searches. And so we'll actually show you in a couple of slides how we can customize searches for specific programs. In this case, epidemiology, which we will, starting now, we'll start tracking that in our database. But we'll show you how we actually pull those keywords and some other ways to analyze that data. In terms of employment, our competition, there's five institutions within New York State. That puts it in the 90th percentile. So there's actually a good amount of institutions compared to other master's programs. One really important thing here, especially if this is a current program or even a new program, identifying how large can this program be for you. So we look at the average completions and the median completions. And so this tells us the average number of completions in New York State for the five programs is 35. That means that there were 35 graduates on average from each institution. Depending on the program length, this is a program, we're looking at a master's program. This could be a 2-year plus, a 2-year plus program. And if you apply your own graduation rates or attrition rates, that could be a program that has a population of 70 plus students. So just using the graduates here, we can kind of get an idea of what the size of this program, the opportunity for the size of this program. Now, if you're going to be one of the larger institutions, you can kind of base that number more on the average. But if you're going to be in the middle or lower in terms of your competitiveness in this market, you might be seeing a lower number of students. And we'll take a look at the actual completions in this market. So in New York, the largest institution is Columbia University. They actually provide this program at multiple levels, starting at the master's level, 149 completions in 2019 or 2018. They also have a postmaster's certificate. They're producing 67 graduates, and a doctoral program where they're producing 12. This is by far the largest institution in New York, and that's really what's driving up the average in terms of that average program size. We then see a few other programs. They're all running around, if we're looking at just the masters, we're between 6 and 9 graduates. If you would estimate this to be a 2-year program, this could be a program where you have 20 to 30 students in this at any time. One thing we wanted to show is how we can look at this. May be a program where you might be competing more on a national level. And so looking at first the growth rates nationally, if we actually go back, we can see the number of completions in New York has pretty much stayed flat after between 260 to 290 over the last 4 years. Overall, nationally, this program has grown 8% per year, up to 2,000. And in addition, there are some programs that are offering an online modality. And we'll talk about that in a second. First is to look at the largest programs and starting with Columbia, as we saw. So in New York, that's still the largest program. Then we have Emory, Boston, University of Miami, and the University of Texas system, all producing over 100 plus graduates, 100 graduates in each of their master's degree program. So this does have the potential to be a large program. You'll just have to see what your competitive advantage is to provide students a better offer and to be able to get to those sizes. As I mentioned, there are some online modalities. For example, the first program that shows up as an online modality is Benedictine University. They have a post-baccalaureate certificate online, where we're estimating that they're going to have around 41 graduates from that program. They had 56 total, and we do an estimate of how many of those are online based on some other data we're able to pull from the Department of Education's IPEDS database. So let's then look at employment. This is one section which isn't as strong as the other two in terms of the the data that's available. First thing to notice that in New York, we're tracking not only how many are currently employed in occupations related based on BLS, but how many job postings there were in the last 12 months. In this case, there's currently 70 employed in occupations related to epidemiology and about 6 job openings per grad. And so this would tell us that you really need to make sure when you're providing this, and especially when you're at the master's level, typically those types of students will actually have jobs already, and they're really going to get more, to get specialized in an area. So this may be a program where the employment data is not as important of a factor when making a decision around a program as, are students interested in it, and then who you might be competing with. So in this case, I would say you'd really want to evaluate and understand who the employers are, what are the requirements, what skills are they looking for, and then really understand, again, to really dig into more of that employment side of this data. In terms of degree fit, we've already started getting to this, as we mentioned, some of the degree levels. The master's level, in terms of where students are searching, as well as what students are graduating with, is the most prevalent. So we have 100% of our inquiry database. It wasn't a large sample of inquiries, but all of them were at the master's level. And then for looking at the completions within the market, 65% were at the master's, 25% are getting a postmaster's certificate, and 7% getting a doctoral. That's slightly different from the national market, other than the master's level. That's still the most prevalent award level, 71%. Postmaster's certificate, slightly smaller relative to New York, 4%, and the doctoral level is much higher at 18%. So slight shift, but really the main level here is going to be a master's degree. In terms of what is being requested in the job postings, starting with the education requested, we have 65% are saying bachelor's, 68% master's, 71% doctoral. What this means when you see percentages like this is just that the job postings themselves are listing out multiple options. For example, one might say bachelor's preferred, or minimum of bachelor's, master's preferred, or doctoral preferred. In that case, in that job posting, all 3 award levels will show up. And it's just a way of understanding, really what is being requested in the job postings, even if there are multiple levels being requested. And then we have the educational attainment of the workforce. So for the degree levels of the currently employed in the occupations related to this program, we have a bachelor's of 25%, master's 23%, and doctoral actually 51%. So 100% of the occupations related to this program are bachelor's and above, and a mix between bachelor's, master's, and doctoral. So what you can start to understand is first, what we've already gone through is that this is a majority of master's program. It has the opportunity to have large programs, but you'll be competing with some major players in the industry, um, and you really want to make sure you understand the employment outcomes. If this is a program where students typically are already employed and they're getting specialized in an area for specific reasons, again, the employment data will be less of a factor, but again, you'll want to dig into that information. When one thing we've done, we walk through each of the sections, but we just wanted to give you an example of one of the entire scorecard. This is a lot on one page. We did that on purpose, taking into account that it's one of the most efficient ways to be able to evaluate and compare a program, not only overall, but on each individual metric as well. So I'm not going to walk through this, but an example from our database is a scorecard like this for all 1,400 zip codes. In any market definition, we can create any custom market, and you can select different modalities, award levels, and so on. And it becomes a very efficient way for you to be able to evaluate a lot of data all in one place. One thing I didn't really talk about is the visual cues we have on here. The color coding, I'm not going to go too much into it, but typically green is good, red is bad. That's the way we designed it to help you draw your eyes to the certain areas. The strongest area in terms of the 4 categories is the competitive intensity, meaning that, it's a less competitive market. You're still going to have some opportunity if you can get to that larger program size. Currently, there's not a lot of institutions providing an online program, so that may represent opportunity for an online option. And in terms of saturation in this market, it's actually pretty low. And that happens a lot in New York State just because of the population density there. So if you have any questions about the scorecard and digging into this, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd be happy to walk you through a scorecard as well as provide you with a sample scorecard specific to your market in a program of your choice. So please do let us know if you'd like to dig into this and get a sample for something that's relevant to you. So as I mentioned, I really want to dig into the employment data. One database that we're about to launch is our ability to give you more information about the job postings themselves. So this is an extract from our job postings database. Basically says within New York, here are the top employers for occupations that list epidemiology in the job posting. So one important thing to consider there is we're now not limited by the taxonomy of the occupation codes or the program codes from iPads. We can actually do text search within the job postings to really identify relevant opportunities for graduates. And so in this case, here are just some of the top employers and their percent of the job postings. Columbia University has the highest share with 15%. Some other employers on here, Regeneron is actually making headlines right now for COVID, for trial testing remedies for the COVID-19 symptoms. So it's pretty interesting to see that this is one of the largest employers for epidemiology, as well as how relevant it is to the current situation around the world. One other thing we can really pull from this is the top skills that the employers are looking for. So based on the same search for epidemiology in the job posting, we're able to then identify what skills are also most requested. Biostatistics, data management, programming are the top 3. I didn't know too much about the epidemiology program before doing this, and was actually surprised at how much it has to do with analytics and statistics, as well as understanding of programming and managing data and databases. So it's pretty interesting to see the top three all have to do with statistics and data management and programming. Within our system as well, you'll be able to dig all the way down to the job posting. And so this is just an example of one of the Regeneron job postings. And so this is what's really feeding all of that information that you saw in the previous charts. First identifying that epidemiology is listed in here, and you can see it, probably small, but you can see it here, listed here. And then second, what are they actually looking for? What are they requiring? As you can see, as I mentioned, you have advanced graduate degree as a requirement from master's, PhD. So that's where you get the multiple listings of award levels in one job posting. And then you also get all the skills that you're able to pull from this. So there's a lot of information that we're making readily available for our subscribers to our system. So one other section that I wanted to dig a little bit more into this epidemiology was around the interest. And so leveraging our Google search database, we can understand where students, prospective students, are searching from, where they actually reside. So here's a map on the left that shows searches per 10,000 population. If we showed just population, just search volume, you would pretty much see a map of population. So we wanted to really show you the density of searches. Also on this map are all the competitors. So if you can imagine, not only can you see where the searches are happening, but you'll also be able to see exactly who and where the competitors are, or the other institutions or your institution offering this program. So one thing we found is that Washington, DC has a very high searches per capita, almost 41. So we're going to switch from looking at New York to actually switching to looking at Washington, DC. In Washington, DC, there was 2,740 searches in the last 12 months. That's 41 comparing to 10,000 population. The average here, we're looking at about 7. So it's much higher relative to other markets. Some other markets that are up that are really high in terms of density: Vermont, Delaware, Rhode Island. We're all in the top 4. So what are prospective students searching? So here's a list of some of the top keywords that we researched and we're pulling, and we'll actually be adding to our database of Google search trends. Epidemiology study was the #1 with 15% share of the searches in the DC market. So with this information, you can really start to understand, and make sure that if you're wanting to promote your program, this is information that you could use to make sure that you're leveraging some of the most searched keywords. And so that when you're, potentially participating in Google AdWords, that you're, leveraging these to hopefully get your institution's program to the top of the list when prospective students are searching. In addition to the program keywords, we also pulled a sample of brand keywords. And so who are they searching for? We pulled one as a sample. This is a sample analysis of just 5 brands in the DC market. We pulled keywords specific to the program. For example, Columbia University Epidemiology would be the example of the keyword we're tracking here. And we did that for 5 brands here: Columbia, Harvard, UCLA, George Washington University, and Boston University. Interestingly enough, the George Washington University is the only local offer in the DC market, but it's not the highest searched in terms of, program brand specific to epidemiology. So it's really interesting to see, even if you're the only offer in the market, you may be competing with other brands, and who are those other brands? And so this, research can really bring that to light, and show that, you're competing with a college on the, university on the other side of the country in UCLA, Columbia just up the, up the way there, Harvard just up, and Boston University, up in Massachusetts. So understanding who's actually competing in your market is a big use case for this brand search database. And we took this a step further to really understand, does this have an effect on overall program size? And so what we've done here is we've done a comparison of the number of completions. So that's a number of completions for the epidemiology program for each of these institutions as a percent of searches. And one reason, what we see here is George Washington University actually has a very high number of completions compared to the number of searches nationally. We switched to the national market because these are national, these brands are located all over the place, and so we wanted to do a national comparison here. So what this tells us is that, one reason for this could be, DC had a very unusually high proportion of people interested in epidemiology compared to the population. So that was one thing. And that could really be one reason why GWU could have such a high number of completions relative to their, the brand program search. And so they could really be benefiting from being the only local offer in a market where there's a high proportion of people interested in this program. So it was very interesting for us to see that, first, knowing where students are searching, comparing that to the population, get kind of a density of that, as well as how does that affect the overall institution, even if they're not one of the stronger brands in terms of, specific brand search. So again, we leverage our database to be able to do a lot of high level and detailed data analysis about programs and markets. But then we also have these additional databases where we can really dig into the details. And oftentimes that does require, that is required for some programs. I think epidemiology was a great example for that, where you can get a lot more information as you start to really dig into the details of the databases. So in summary, inquiries are rising, but only for online programs. So as we saw, on-ground programs still decline. Overall, online is still, overall inquiries are growing, but it's really, again, only in online. We saw the conversions are falling, but again, as I mentioned, what we're starting to notice is that for conversions, inquiries to mature, that time frame is starting to extend. So we might actually consider extending that to 4 or 5 months for inquiries to actually mature to conversions, so that we can start doing more relevant comparisons for those conversion rates. For the program of the month, it was a low score overall, driven by the employment, but one piece that I would dig into even further is to understand who these students are, and really understand what they're coming back to, why they're taking a program in epidemiology. Is it to gain advancement in their current employment, or other? What we did notice when we dig into the information is that a large area for a market for epidemiology was Washington, DC. And because of that, one of the local offers, George Washington University, even though it's not one of the larger brand searches for epidemiology, it's still at a high number of completions. And it could be because it's located in the market where there's such a high search for that. As always, good market data enables better program decisions. Better program decisions increase margins. Higher margins ensure viability and enable investment in your mission. And so that's one of our, yeah, that's what we always believe, is that, you know, data is here to inform. It's not here to make the decision, but without it, you could be making decisions, you know, blindly. So again, thank you for taking the time to look through this month's results in February 2020. Netta, do we have any questions or?
Yeah, Zach, can you see the Q&A section on the bottom, or do you want me to read them to you?
Let me see. I do. Oh, yeah, there it is. So the first question is, how do we differentiate searches for information from searches for programs? Could an epidemiology study be journalist in DC searching for information about public health? That is absolutely a possibility. You know, when we work on these type of specific projects, we would take a step further and say, okay, let's look at the actual results for epidemiology study. And if we decide that that is not pulling up results that we would expect for programs, then we would most likely exclude it. So it's a great question. It does require data, you know, the judgment as well as the data to inform making that decision. So thank you for that question. When we do this with specific, we try to be as specific to programs as possible. Sometimes that doesn't work perfectly, and just being aware of that and being transparent about the potential issues of the results based on keywords that you're using is really important. Thank you. Any other questions? All right. Well, again, I thank you very much for joining us this month. We do have our next two webcasts scheduled, April 23rd and May 21st. So I hope you'll be able to join us then. Oh, one second. There was one more question that pulled in. So the question was, when looking at the top 5 and the fast 5, is that a combination of online and on ground? In this case, it is a combination. So in our database, you'll be able to strip that out very easily. And if you'd like us to actually look at that for you, please reach out to us and we'll get you that information. But in the case of this webinar, it's a combination of both. All right. Well, again, thank you very much. I hope everyone is being safe out there, and wishing everyone the best in everything that's going on with all of us. I think, yeah, good luck. Thank you.